So first of all, I am pleased that in the light of comments made by various people, including at the NASBIC conference, which I was pleased to be at just the other week, where the original intention was to publish the ITT content framework. DFE colleagues did describe it as a spring, but they actually meant the spring term, and it was never going to be May or June, February. But that would have been challenging for providers because they need time to reflect on the ITT content framework and adjust their programs accordingly. So we were pleased that the DFE was able to bring publication forward, and because of the general election, there was a feeling that it would be helpful to get it out before PERDA kicked in. So it was published on Friday, and I think PERDA actually formally begins tomorrow. So I think they did well to get that. So by way of background, the origins of the framework go back to Sir Andrew Carter's review of initial teacher education published in 2015, and this report, we must be reminded of this. It did praise the quality of initial teacher education across the board, including that delivered by SCITS and by the HEI sector. So it said it painted a very positive picture, and that followed, I think, Sam, probably a visit to pretty much every ITE provider in the country. 32. Which is a big proportion of them, and an in-depth review of course documentation. So, but despite the overall positive picture, it did identify a number of inconsistencies in regard to some important areas, examples being pedagogic subject knowledge, special educational needs, and assessment. So, building on the Carter review, that led to the development by Stephen Mundy's team, introduced in 2016, the first ITE content framework. I mean, I actually quite liked that document. I think it was helpfully grouped under each of the teacher standards, and it struck a good balance between ensuring a degree of consistency across the sector while at the same time allowing for an appropriate degree of flexibility. And as I said, it was helpfully grouped under the teacher standards. Hello? That's better, right. I mean, I will always champion academic freedom and the right of SCITS and HEIs to have flexibility in the way they design and deliver their ITE programs, but we must also remember that teaching is a profession, and holders of QTS are allowed to teach in any school across any phase in all parts of the countries and schools in a range of different circumstances. So I think there is a strong case for ensuring a degree of consistency in terms of programme content over and above that implied by the teacher standards. And I think I'm reflecting back on what our late colleague Gordon Kirk always said, that teachers should have access, because it's a profession, to a shared base of knowledge, which is the hallmark of any profession. But as ever, it's getting the balance right between having access to a shared knowledge base, student teachers having an entitlement to have a consistent level of training, and the schools that go on to employ them, employing teachers which they can be sure that their ITE is covered proper ground, and the quite right of providers to adjust programs in the light of particular circumstances. And helpful as I think it was, Stephen Mundy's framework, there was a case for to build on it and update it following the introduction of the early career framework earlier this year, which represents an entitlement for all NQTs for 2 years structured professional development in the pilot areas from September 2020 and nationally to September 2021. We've long argued that all new teachers should have an entitlement to structured early professional development that builds on and complements their initial teacher education. We have, as you may have noticed over the last week, called for that to be at master's level, but with the less said for today about that, the better. But we have long argued for new teachers to have access to structured early professional development that builds on and complements their ITE, and to that extent, the early career framework, I think, is a step in the right direction, and you heard Mary Bousted give her positive views on it earlier. So if the early career framework is to build on and complement initial teacher education, as we have said it should do, then it does make sense for ITE content to lead seamlessly into the early career framework, or as the rather unpleasant phrase which I will still, however, use velcroing the two together, as have been said. Hence the work of the ITE Content Review Group. I mean, it would have in many ways made sense either to develop the ECF and the ITT content framework together, or to do the ITT content framework first and for the ECF to build on that, but things don't always work in the most logical way. But I think there was still a case the ECF does suggest a need to review ITE content. So the 8-person advisory group that developed the framework, it's met 7 times so far, and a further meetings planned for later this month to talk about implementation. And there's also been a lot of communication outside meetings, as you would expect. DFE staff who can't be here at this discussion because of PERDA attend the meetings to guide discussions, but to be fair to them, they haven't ruled anything out or mandated any particular thing to be included. Discussions have been collegiate, and while some people have quite legitimately expressed concerns about the precise composition of the group, it was probably about the right size to allow proper work to be done, and it did, which was essential if we were going to work with this, include sector representatives in the shape of myself for UCET and Emma Hollis from NASBIT, and I think us two representing the entire accredited teacher education sector added a bit of robustness to it, and I think had a very positive impact. I mean, securing unanimity on such a diverse group is not always going to be practical, and I think the group quite sensibly acknowledged early on that you wouldn't be able to agree on everything, particularly particular theories of education, particular philosophies to adopt, so it decided it wouldn't seek consensus on that. Hence, we have a lot of flexibility within the framework for providers to plan their programs in the light of their own particular circumstances and my priorities. From my perspective, I went into the group to make sure that the framework was intellectually robust, that it ensures teachers are educated and not just trained, that it's flexible, and as I said, it's adaptable to meet the needs of different student teachers working in different contexts. And I would really very much welcome your views on the extent to which that has been achieved. Many of you will have attended roundtable events where drafts of sections of the framework are shared and discussed. A number of smaller meetings were held. I went to a few meetings. Sam went obviously to a lot more. Some of you, how many here went to some of these roundtable discussions? So that's a fair number. And DFE colleagues also came along to the UCET Executive Committee and to the NASBIT board, and where detailed discussions were also held. So it was quite a collegiate process. While not all the comments and suggestions made at the various meetings were reflected in the draft published on Friday, and I have to say, acknowledge Sam's contribution here, she very much challenged DFE to say, why isn't this included? This was raised at roundtable meetings, this drafting change of suggestion. They were really challenged to say why certain things weren't included, and some of the comments made, I think we will look at and consider and take into account during the implementation phase and in the preparation of any guidance, subsequent guidance, which the sector produces for itself through the representative bodies of UCET and NASBIT and maybe other partners as well. So the framework itself, which was published Friday, is going to be introduced in September 2020. While it's not statutory, it is de facto mandatory because Ofsted, when it carries out its ITE inspections under the new inspection framework, will inspect to ensure compliance. But we are talking to Ofsted, particularly to ensure a measured approach to ensuring compliance with this, particularly in the early stages, because given that the sector will need some time to bring this into their programs. So a measured and sensible approach to ensuring compliance, especially during the early stages, and especially in the context that at the same time we're going to have a wholly new Ofsted ITT inspection framework, which we're also going to be talking about tomorrow, but that's had to be pulled because of PERDA as well. I don't think it will simply be a matter of mapping existing ITE programs to the new framework. There wouldn't have been much point doing drafting the new framework if it was going to be as easy as that. Real changes will be required, and both UCET and NASBIT are going to be organising events and discussions to support our members through the process. And it will be very good to have your feedback about exactly how we might do that and exactly what form those events and discussions might take. The existing teacher standards will remain in place. I personally think there is a strong case for reviewing the teacher standards in the light of both the content framework and the early career framework, but that's not going to happen. There's no plans for that to happen, so we have to live in the world we live in. So the current student teachers will continue to be assessed against the existing teacher standards before they're going to be recommended for QTS. The framework itself should not be used as an assessment tool. Rather than being an assessment tool, it represents a minimum, and I stress minimum, entitlement on what student teachers can expect to be covered during their ITE programs. Delivery of the content framework will allow students to be able, or should facilitate students being able to demonstrate that they meet many of the teacher standards, but programs will have to cover more and will be expected to cover more than the ITT content framework itself. It doesn't attempt to cover everything that programs should cover. So a lot of the comments have been along the lines of, where is this, where is that? Their exclusion doesn't mean they're not deemed to be important. Good ITE providers will expect to do more than what is set out in the ITT content framework. As I said, it's a minimum entitlement for student teachers themselves. And the fact that not everything is covered, that's what gives you the ability to be flexible and to adapt your programs to your own particular needs and circumstances. We do have copy slides with the content framework on. I'm not sure we'll actually need them, but if people want to, we could fast forward and focus on particular aspects of it if you would like us to do so. But before, we want to allow plenty of time for discussions and questions. But before then, a few words from the chair. Sam.
Thanks, James. And it's good to see so many people in the room who did contribute to those meetings. They were incredibly intense, but incredibly useful. And I apologise in advance to those people, so I'm going to say some of the same things that I said at the beginning of those meetings now. And I'm going to try not to repeat what James said, but I can't promise I won't cover some of the same ground a little bit. I will start by going back to Carter. As some of you know, I was on the advisory group for that, and had a really intense involvement in terms of visiting lots of providers and talking to lots of experts and talking to NQTs, RQTs, trainees, mentors, etc. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, life-changing experience for me. As James said, what we found was loads and loads of good practice. It was definitely not what the expectation was at the beginning. I don't think it was for me, but not from Michael Gove, who was the person who set it up. We found loads of good practice. We didn't really find anything that we could be incredibly critical of, other than, as James said, some inconsistency. But even the inconsistency, it was hard to be critical, because the inconsistency came about as a result of the biggest finding that we did say in the report, but wasn't particularly picked up, not by the press, not even really by the sector, because I think we've just got so used to living with it, which is that certainly for postgraduate routes, ITE is just far too short. Particularly when you look at the kind of what came out of the expert group discussions. You know, so we had lots of different themes where we'd bring in a group of SEND experts or subject knowledge experts or behaviour experts, and really amazing, sensible discussions would last at least a couple of hours. And as a result of those, we would have pages and pages and pages of notes of everything these experts said a new teacher needed to know and be able to do in order to be competent in that particular aspect of their practice. And it was all common sense stuff. You probably wouldn't argue with it. But, you know, the idea that you can possibly meaningfully cover all of that ground in what is effectively 9 months, the majority of which is spent in school, rightly so, but it really limits the opportunity for that kind of input. So what providers have tended to do is either try and cram it all in a way that the trainees then couldn't really remember, it just washed over, or it hadn't been at the right time, or they'd made choices, and you know, every provider will do this, we do this. We make choices about the things that we're really going to prioritise, and that means it's always at the expense of something that has to be deprioritised. It all gets covered, but some of it much more superficially than others. So fast forward then to where we are now, or in fact where we were 18 months ago, when DFE announced that they were going to publish a recruitment and retention strategy. By this point, unlike when we published the Carter Review, by this point DFE were admitting there was a problem with recruitment and retention, and sometimes even use the word crisis. Because by this point, we had seen year on year more and more teachers leaving the profession earlier and earlier, and every year the stats just get worse, both in terms of the number who are leaving and how much earlier they are leaving. Now, we all know there's multiple reasons for that, but undoubtedly, as far as I'm concerned, one of them has to be the fact that they've had so little time to be trained, and then they enter the profession as NQTs, and this isn't the case for everybody, but it certainly is a case for a lot. Schools will have unrealistic expectations, partly because of the accountability that they're under. These NQTs are expected to hit the ground running in a way that's totally unrealistic. That therefore is bound to lead to stress, to workload, to a lack of satisfaction. And if you've got other options and the possibility of earning equal or sometimes more money elsewhere, when you're feeling that stressed, it's not surprising that people make that choice. So DfE have actually at last admitted this is a problem, and they've been quite honest and quite sensible in how they've gone around kind of analysing all the different aspects of the teacher retention problem, which then leads on to the teacher recruitment problem. For me, the focus on the early career bit, which isn't all that they're doing, but that for me is the biggest thing. The early career framework, it's not perfect, but it's a damn sight better than what we've got at the moment. And what it will do, if we get it right and the sector gets behind it, is it will guarantee for all NQTs and RQTs, so it's 2 years of high quality input, support and development, alongside hopefully high quality mentoring. Get that mentoring bit right, it has the potential to really have an impact on all aspects of school, including the ITE, but also hopefully will permeate the rest of the school as well. So I've always been a fan of the early career framework, simply because I can see it helping to address that problem of ITE not being long enough. Take it alongside, the shortest routes for ITE. Obviously, you've got undergraduate or some of the longer postgraduate ones, it's even longer, but you've got a minimum now of 3 years guaranteed high quality initial input, development and support. So for me, the ITT bit of that, what's most important about it is what James has said, that it will make it as seamless with what comes later as possible. So you do get a coherent three years worth of something, which brings it nearer, not quite as in line as we'd like it to, but nearer in line with the highest performing systems elsewhere, where it usually takes up to, around 5 years. 3 years is better than 9 months, isn't it? So for me, that was the most important thing, that what we're trying to do is create a kind of spiral curriculum, not curriculum, framework, mustn't use the word curriculum, but it's a spiralling that's important for me. James is right, in some ways it would have been helpful to do the two together and maybe to start with initial, because chronologically that makes sense. And so there has been some value though in working back as well. I wouldn't say it's been entirely sort of negative having to do it that way round. I think though one of the consequences of working back from it is really important to understand that because we decided that the early career framework, it was so important to be consistent with that, and if you've looked at the two documents together, you will see the left-hand column, the know that column is absolutely identical in both documents, because we just wanted that seamlessness to be as in your face as possible. One of the consequences of that I'm not 100% happy with is that there are some things missing from that left-hand column, I think, that you would expect to see in ITE. Arguably, you might expect to see them in early career as well, but certainly in ITE where it's really foundational. So I'd have liked more on subject knowledge, on child development, on things like trauma-informed, a kind of examining of all the circumstances outside schools and teachers' control that impact on schools' ability to learn and so on. There's less on that than I would have liked. Hence, it's really important that we see it as a framework, as James has said. Really important that you don't take out all from your courses all of that stuff that I think is so important, that I think is missing. So, it's really important when you look at the document to read the introduction. We worked really hard on that, probably worked harder on that than the framework, if I'm honest, because we were so kind of obsessed that people understood what it was, but also what it wasn't. When it comes to the framework itself, the bit that we spent the most time on is obviously the right-hand column, because we agreed early on to leave the left-hand column as it was. And initially, I would say the first 2 or 3 of our meetings, we really focused hard on school-based experience. Because again, we know from the Carter Review, I know from my own personal research, everybody in this room knows, that that can be the real make or break part of the kind of learning experience for student teachers. What happens in school will have the biggest impact, both positively and negatively, and they spend so much of their time there. So we spent a lot of time on mentoring, and you'll see there's a big emphasis on mentoring, but then we kind of extended that discussion to think of mentors actually often as being their kind of orchestrators of access to expertise beyond that individual mentor. Because again, through Carter, we know that that's what the best providers do. They will bring in the experts on pastoral care, on curriculum design, on a particular aspect of behaviour, etc. They will also benefit from the visits that they get from their providers, and really important that that is acknowledged. So we tried to really kind of make sure that that was clear as well, that those visits from subject experts, phase experts, etc., are kind of acknowledged and kind of clearly there. I think something that made us uncomfortable sort of when we looked at the draft in those early days, though, as a result of that, it began to read a bit like an apprenticeship manual, because we were so focused on school experience, and that is absolutely, definitely not the intention. It certainly wasn't my intention. I don't think it was a DFE's either. So then we went through a phase, and it'd be interesting to see whether you think we've gone far enough with this, of really trying to think about, you know, the importance of all the things that Trevor was talking about, those critical questions, and the importance of trainees right from the very beginning, having that kind of critically reflective approach to their practice, to looking at the evidence base for it, to looking at other people's practice, and in particular, you know, the really important opportunity that they have in their initial teacher training to compare and contrast different approaches that different schools take. So for an example that springs to mind is, you know, we've put in things there about talking to schools about the rationale behind their curriculum design, because it's so helpful if trainees can spend some time in one school that takes one approach and then another school that takes another approach, and really having the opportunity to talk to them about that, and then looking at the evidence base, the rationale, seeing what it looks like in practice. Really, really important part of that kind of formation of sort of professional identity that is so important in that early phase. So we put a lot of emphasis on that. So we've tried to put in a lot more kind of critical reflection, looking at evidence. I've seen a few comments on social media to suggest that people haven't seen enough of that. So please don't think that we're saying you shouldn't be doing that, because you absolutely should. Ofsted would agree as well. I think that's probably as much as I'm going to say. I've got other things in notes, but I think I'll kind of keep them in for response to questions, because it's probably more important that we get the chance to open up now for you to make comments and ask questions.
Right, thanks very much, James and Sam. So, is this on? All right, thank you. So, basically, hands up for questions. Try and take them in the order in which people ask them. There must be one.
Silence indicates consent, by the way.
There's no truth in the rumour that James is buying all the beers at the bar tonight, so that can't be keeping you back. Thank you very much.
I'm looking at this and thinking about my institution and what I'm going to do with it. And the first thing that springs to mind is we look at our programmes as they exist at the minute, which are very much based around the teacher standards, making sure that the students get enough training to be able to pass those standards. So we're now looking at this core content and trying to map it maybe to what we're already doing. And the only thing I can think is we're going to have to put extra in, because we can't drop anything, because they've still got to meet the teacher standards, but they've now also got to consider the content as well. And that seems to go against this message that we're getting out of trying to reduce workload for trainees. So I've got that dilemma as, do I put more stuff into our programmes? What do I leave out? So I'd just like a bit of advice really as what's the way forward tomorrow when I go back into the university. And they say, what we're going to do about this new IT core content then?
So could you just give me some examples of the kinds of things that you feel you're not covering and that you would need to add in? Because maybe I'm being naive, but I don't think personally, you might change your terminology a little bit, but most of what's in there is what I thought we saw providers were already doing. It might not be organised in the way it is organised in the framework, but the ground was still being covered, I think, went through Carter. So just give me some examples.
Well, for example, rationale behind curriculum design that we've just talked about, that maybe that's not something we've focused on. We've certainly the students will plan lessons and plan sequences of lessons, but they've not necessarily had that conversation with their mentor or their school leaders as to what the rationale behind that curriculum design is, and maybe some of the research that's gone into that. To me, that's a little bit extra that just springs to mind. I mean, I've not studied this yet because it's the first time I've seen it on Friday, so I've not really had that chance to sit and look at it in depth, but that's one thing that springs to mind.
Okay,
there may be others.
I can see, I mean, I think that would be a really beneficial conversation for your student teachers to be having with their mentors, and it's this kind of thing that we would certainly already be encouraging. There is a worry, though, there is real validity to the point you've made there. Are we putting too much onto schools? Does that require them to do more? I would hope schools would see the sense in having these kinds of conversations and would find it beneficial in terms of the students themselves being able to kind of contribute most effectively to their role in delivering that curriculum. But it is something we've got to keep an eye on, I think, that we're not putting schools off, because we all know that, you know, they already have a choice that they sometimes make in a way that's not helpful to us about the extent to which we want to get engaged in this.
Yeah. And I'd just say, I mean, examples like that would be really helpful to have, and hopefully at the events that we're having, we can sort of work through examples of how that might be adjusted by, to some extent, not adding things on or getting rid of things, changing the way some things are done and doing them in a different way to match this, but with no net gain in terms of burden. That's what I think we'd be trying to look at through the supportive work we ourselves and NASBIT plan on carrying on doing.
Sorry, is this on? Yeah. Yeah, a couple of comments, really. One of my concerns about it, and I do have quite a few concerns, but I'll just limit it to one, is the relevance of the framework to those student teachers that we're developing that are early years specialists, because I think there's a lot in it. It feels very secondary to me. So that's one of the comments I would make. And a lot of the kind of the push around how student teachers should be developed feels like it's taking a particular approach that's very secondary. The other thing I'd like to ask specifically, though, is around the status of the behaviour management report, which was released on the same page as this and at the same time. And what it says in the introduction is that it's been released to support providers in designing their curriculum. And to me, it's a very particular view of behaviour management, and it feels as if that particular approach to behaviour management is being integrated into this core content as something that we should all be promoting in our student teachers. So I'd just like real clarification about the status of that behaviour management report. So
the behaviour report is not new. So that came in with the Monday framework back in, was it 2016?
But not statutory.
Yeah. So it's just as it was. It was just because there were some comments from some of the people we talked to who looked at drafts of the framework that we hadn't gone into very much detail on behaviour, and we, you know, it's already too long, the framework. So we didn't want to put that detail in. So the idea of referring to a report that was already there, which the way it's, I get what you're saying about the way it presents itself. If you look at the substance in the document itself, I think it's mostly pretty useful, practical things that student teachers would benefit from. But hence my comments earlier on about some of the things that I think are missing from the framework in terms of trauma-informed, for example. The thing about secondary and primary, again, when I first kind of got to grips with the early career framework, which was obviously our basis, it felt a bit secondary. We've tried to address that in what we've put into the right-hand column. The left-hand column, as you know, has stayed, so I guess some of that has stayed as well. It is meant to be covering primary and secondary, not kind of 0 to 3, but I know that's not the point that you're making, really.
So 3 to 7.
I think I personally think what's in the right-hand column is workable for primary, as a primary specialist myself. But I do understand the point you're making as well, though.
On the status of the behaviour report, I think that is something we will need to perhaps seek clarification on, because it was discussed within the group. My understanding is the ITT content framework has a particular status that's not necessarily shared by the accompanying report, which is supportive of it but not part of it. But I think that's something we probably do need to talk to Ofsted about.
Right now, I'm clear it's not statutory, the behaviour report, because they want, at the time it was published, they wanted it to be, but DfE wouldn't. And that's not changed, but you know, that it might do. But right as of today, its status is as it was then.
Yeah, and not even de facto statutory.
Right, I have a question. My concern relates, so I'm here. My concern relates to the right-hand column and to, obviously, it's very clearly integrated with school experience. But the responsibility for the implementation, I assume, sits with the provider. And we would struggle to ensure that the students are accessing in the schools that we work with, particularly with large partnerships, the experiences that were being expected there. So, for example, just even the point around discussing and analysing with expert colleagues how the placement school changes groups regularly, avoiding the perception that groups are fixed. And, you know, we know that we have many schools that aren't using that sort of practice. So are we expected to just be working with certain schools that meet these criteria, and how would we then be accountable for that?
I think that's a really important and valid comment that kind of reflects quite a lot of the discussion that we had in the group, because we're a very large provider and we use lots of schools, and we know we can't guarantee all the schools will be able to do everything that ideally would be in that framework. That's why we brought in the use of the word expert colleagues quite a lot, and that to be used in a very broad and flexible way, because actually quite a lot of those discussions I think would need to happen back at base, at the university or the skip base or whatever. What we're not doing is depending on all of those conversations and the reflections and the looking at the evidence and things to happen in school, because we know that can't be guaranteed. But you can have some really sensible collective group discussions on comparing and contrasting their collective experiences. I think that's, and certainly we've been talking to Ofsted about that quite a lot in terms of, you know, what evidence of that happening might look like in terms of if they're inspecting for the provider's use of the framework. And they are clear that it's the kinds of conversations that have been facilitated rather than sort of a tick box mentality of checking every single school has, yes, had the curriculum conversation, yes, had the behaviour conversation, etc. So I think we've got to a fairly sensible place with that. But you know, I do recognise the concern that you've got there. I think as long as you recognise that expert conversation very often will happen back at base, not just in school.
I have a question in relation to the right-hand side column and the significance of high-quality mentoring in relation to that column, and perhaps a disconnect then with the significance of high-quality mentoring in the schools inspection framework, and there being a disconnect there, and whether there were any discussions about the need to raise the status and profile of mentoring within the schools inspection framework.
I mean, I think the emphasis on mentoring was discussed at great detail in the group. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about the support that's going to be provided for mentoring under the early career framework for NQTs and RQTs, and I think there's a serious discussion to be had about ensuring proper support for mentor training of ITE students, and that could perhaps be addressed through the school inspection framework, but I think there is a big discussion to be had about support for the mentoring of ITE students and financial backing for that.
Yeah, James is right. That is a live and ongoing, and at the moment feeling potentially fruitful discussion. There's also a discussion happening with Ofsted as well. I actually had a meeting with Amanda Spielman and Sean Harford about this very issue, and I would say that is also an ongoing conversation. They are clear about the importance of mentoring, you know, not just for ITE but for the early career framework. There is a discussion about what the schools inspection framework can do to maybe support the need for that. There's also, as James said, quite clearly a sort of an understanding of the need for a sort of phased approach in terms of mentor expectations, etc. I think, you know, to put a positive frame on it, I think what both DFE and Ofsted are recognising is if actually we can really get it right with mentor training both for early career and for ITE, it has the potential to have a ripple impact through the whole system. And that, you know, that's a win-win, isn't it? So it's you know, it's good for all of us to be having these conversations as visibly and as constructively as possible, because it feels like they're in listening mode at the moment. So, you know, let's keep that conversation going.
Hello. We know that this framework is for the primary and secondary sectors, but do you think there's any expectation or possibility that any of this will be expected also from the FE ITE phase, given that quite a number of our trainees go on to teach in the school sector, and also that we have the same Ofsted framework?
As far as I know, there is no indication that this will apply to the FE sector. As you know very well, that the FE sector ITE programs relate to different sets of standards. There's different requirements. Most training takes place on an in-service basis already. Well,
Some does.
Well, a lot of it.
But not
I
most.
thought it was about 80%, but
No.
some of it. But anyway, an awful lot takes place on an in-service basis. But no, this applies to QTS programs only, and I don't think there's any intention that it gets extended beyond that.
Thank you.
Given that this has been released partly because of the election, do you have any indication from potential new government members, if we had a change in government, about whether this will be sustained?
I don't.
I met with Angela Rayner's equivalent of a SPAD a few months ago. I think it was actually before this work was commissioned, but they were clear about the teacher recruitment and retention problem and the need to solve it. And I think at that point, the early career framework was part of our discussion. I think they understood that something needed to happen. Who knows, though? You know, they'll probably want to put their own kind of twist and spin on it, won't they? But you know, the problem's not going to go away, is it? The stats are the stats. So you would hope that they would be looking for something, and you would hope that they would see some value in what we've got here.
My guess is the early career framework would stay. I couldn't say, this is too early to say what their opinion of this would actually be.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Can I just ask, I have a few conversations with schools these days who say it's not worth having conversations about how children learn because we know the answer to that. It's cognitive load theory. That's what you do. The end. We have Hirsch for our curriculum. We have CLT for our pedagogy, and we get Lemov to tell us the strategies. This document sort of says that. And I know you say it's a minimum and there's all the stuff around you can do, but if it's kind of enshrining that model of saying this is a simple answer to how children learn, I think it shuts down that conversation, which a lot of my trainees want to have. And the reason I love being a teacher is because I have those conversations about how complex learning is and how different it is in different contexts with different children. And I don't think this document kind of encourages that debate. I think it shuts it down in the way that some of the schools I work with completely shut it down and make my trainees' lives miserable, to be quite honest, because the schools are saying do it this way. I think this document kind of validates those schools. They'll use it as validation, let's put it that way. I wondered if you had a thought on that.
I mean, I would point out, I mean, some would be able to explain this better than I, but there's references to the importance of student teachers being able to take a critical approach and to analyse different theories and critique them. So, I mean, there was an attempt to make sure that that teacher education aspect of was maintained in programmes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go back to what I said earlier. I'm sorry if that's not coming through strongly enough for you. It's certainly absolutely in the intent of what should be in that right-hand column. And again, the conversations with Ofsted would also suggest that they're also looking for that criticality and that ability to compare and contrast a range of approaches. So I'm sorry if that's not the way you read it.
Any more questions?
I mean, if I could just sort of say a couple of words. We have to go, Dusty needs to do a sound check. But, I mean, looking at this and the early career framework, I mean, we've been positive about the early career framework. The early career framework could have been a lot better. I mean, both UCET and NASBIT argued that it would make a lot of sense if the early career framework was just delivered by accredited ITE providers, because that would allow seamless transition from ITE into early career development and allow programs to be contextualized to the needs of particular newly qualified teachers, because the ITE provider would have knowledge of their needs and circumstances, and it would come with a built-in quality assurance mechanism. So there's all sorts of things that could have, in an ideal world, would be a bit different. It's just, you know, you have to be pragmatic and you have to work with what you get and the constraints you're working under. And I think, given that, I hope you think we've done a good job.
Right, thanks very much then, James and Sam.